Alright everyone, I finally done it. After saying I would do one at 500 subs and then one at 10,000, here we are at 20,000 subscribers. Okay, in reality, it's closer to 23,000, but who's counting? Anyway, this is meant to be fun, so please don't take my answers super seriously, as I'm going to try my best to answer these questions, but not really in great depth. At most 3 minutes per question. And please remember, it's just my opinion. An opinion of a 22-year-old who probably hasn't read as many books as you. Alright, question 1, starting with a question from Mark Kyle 5895. What would have happened if Lion and Admiral Bay had also blown up in the battle cruiser action at Jutland? Aside from the "there seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today" quote, and Major Harvey not making it into the history books, what would happen next? I think the first thing we have to do is have Alexander Grant, the gunnery officer, online, not transferred to the ship, and make the changes he did to the gunnery safety on board the ship, having the anti-flash doors reinstalled, and pleading with the gun crews to not have the powder bags outside the magazines. So, with Grant not on board, we can say that gunner safety is akin to the other battle cruisers in the fleet, and not substantially better, making it so when Lion's Q turret is hit just after 400 p.m., she did have a similar explosive demise to the likes of Queen Mary and/or Indefatigable, following the demise of Lion Bay, and his entire step staff command of the 1st and 2nd battle cruiser squadrons would fall to Admiral William Penham in New Zealand. Now, Packham was about 10 years older than Bay, and was considered by many to be a genius, devoting his life to the Royal Navy, never marrying, even serving as an observer during the Russo-Japanese War, viewing the Battle of Tsushima. But he was a rather odd man, sleeping fully dressed, collared, and booted whenever at sea. Others, including Admiral Bay, thought he was a bit slow at sea at times, not grasping the situation as quickly as he could have been. With that being said, I think after the loss of Line and the confused situation, Packham turns north much sooner than Bay, thus avoiding the loss of Queen Mary. With Packham being a rather detailed man and officer, I feel that the confusion that persisted between Bay and Rear Admiral Hugh Evan Thomas isn't an issue in this scenario, so the run to the south would come to a close sooner, and the run to the north would begin with Pakenham. Remaining battle cruisers and the 5th Battle Squadron in tow sooner than in our timeline. I think both Hipper and Shear pursue the British ships, but beyond that, it's hard to say. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, but it's how I feel. I will take this time to say that I understand all the hate in the comments that I see about David Bay, but I think one thing people need to take into account is the fact that the man, at least personally, was very brave, which can be seen in his service in the Boxer Rebellion, but some of his decisions, actions, and so on were very interesting looking back on it with 2020 vision. Question 2. This next one comes Armored Cruiser from my friend Anchored Past, another naval history YouTuber. And his question is a 3-parter. But for the sake of time, I will summarize the questions, which is how did the concept of an armored cruiser hold up in the First World War, specifically with SMS Blah in the shores? Class starting with BLCA. I think the ship itself was a good ship. Her armament, speed, and armor were sufficient for battle with other armored cruisers or smaller ships. I think having placed her in the first scouting group with the other large cruisers and/or battle cruisers wasn't a great idea, as she could not match their speed, armament, and armor of the other German ships, leading to the disaster at Dogger Bank. She had no business being there as the British guns pounded the ship, and although she did take a lot of damage, it was just too much. I think a more appropriate role would have been as flagship for the second scouting group of the other cruisers. But she was just such an odd ship due to her size and her design history. But now that I'm thinking about it, on the fly, I think another good role would have been as flagship for the German East Asia Squadron. She might have been able to perform. She might have been able to perform well in that role with the Shores. And Giz now again for the Shores class, I think they're an excellent example of armored cruisers who fulfilled their intended role, outperforming other cruisers and older ships at Coronel. It just so happens that in the battle of the Fallon, it just so happens at the Battle of the Fallon, they ran into the ships that were meant to destroy them. Also, no, I don't see a way for Von Bay to Win the battle. He was outmatched. One last thing though. Reach out for a collab. You know my email. Question 3. Gotham State Police, CS Marine asks, what do you think would have happened if Madagascar became a CS Marine base? Would the Germans limit their operations to SUDs in small ships? Or would large surface vessels occasionally sortie out into the Indian and Pacific Oceans? If they do, would they focus on commerce raiding? Or would they join the IG and fleet actions, assuming it happens in late 41 or early 42? Well, OTS did operate in the area during the Second World War and had limited success, but to be a bit of a party pooper on the question, I think the establishment of a major CS Marine base would have taken a lot of time and effort to set up. Getting the men and materials there would have been difficult, and in reality, probably would have stirred the Allied invasion of the island much sooner than in our timeline, which occurred in late 1942, just for fun. Though let's assume they have a base on the island, what would they have done with it? I think slightly more OTS would have operated in the Indian Ocean and other parts of that area of the world than in our timeline, and would have had an impact on the trade to India. I don't think it would have been as significant because the Germans had a limited amount of OTS, and were focusing on the Atlantic more than anything. I think what would have been interesting is seeing some of the commerce raiders, either auxiliary cruisers or ships like that Admiral Scheer, operate in the Indian Ocean more freely, as remember the Graf and Admiral Scheer both operate in the South Atlantic and beyond. I do think the Germans focus mainly on commerce raiding, as operating with the Japanese would be difficult. Not only was supplying the German ships, but communication would have been a serious problem. Purple Yumi Nagumo 6574 asks if SMS M, we will see a video on SMS M anytime soon, and will you cover some of the little ships from World War I or the Japanese involvement in the First World War? Well, starting with M, boy do I have a story for you guys. In June of 2024, I had a 45-minute long video on Mare ready to go. It was going to be the longest video to date on the channel. I had it recorded in 3/4 of the way edited when disaster struck. Something happened to the save file. It got corrupted or I misplaced it and lost everything. So I've dubbed that video the lost video. I've been mad about it since and have yet to re-record the thing. I'll eventually get back to the video on SMS mod, but for now it's just the video that got away. As for the destroyers and cruisers of World War I and Japan's involvement in the First World War, that just all depends. You guys have to understand I post one video per week and that does take quite a bit of time. And even then, I have to pick and choose subjects that not only I find interesting, but topics most people will find interesting, because at the end of the day, although I enjoy making videos, it's a long process. On top of that, the softwares and books I use aren't free, so I do have to be careful on what subjects I choose. I could see myself doing something with destroyers and cruisers, or Japan, in a larger video. In that larger video, it could be something in the weird and wacky ships video, or new series, but probably not a standalone video. I will say I do need to make more videos on the Imperial Japanese Naval War Navy. Question 5. Finley Scott 7894 asked, only focusing on the naval side, do you think Italy could have won a naval war against France? France hadn't been invaded at this time in World War II, considering the lead up to World War II, and both were in an arms race. Well, you caught me out a good time, as I've been reading up on the Marine National recently and feel pretty good about my answers. Okay, looking at things in a vacuum, in say June 1940, I think it is. Pretty even fight, starting with capital ships. France is the 2 Dunkirks in service. A fast arm, and both could have certainly fought in the battle line. The Breton class making up the older and slower part of the battle line, with the corvette not in the best shape due to their age. On the Italian side, you'd have the 2 refitted Cavour in service, with the Andrea Doris coming out of their refit shortly after in July. So strictly speaking, in June, I'd give the capital ships to the French. But in a prolonged naval war, you'd have to give it to the Italians, with the Vittorio Veneto coming even with Jean Bart and Richelieu. Now for the cruiser, I think the Italians have the edge with cruisers. Their heavy cruisers, especially the Trentos and Czars, were very good ships. The light cruisers were also excellent. As for light ships, the 2 sides were really going at it, and large destroyers, as I've covered a long time ago on this channel. But I think the French would have the edge with their Large destroyers and other smaller craft in this vacuum, it's hard for me to say who comes up on top. I lean towards the French, if it's just June 1940, but if it's a longer war just between Italy and France, I think Italy wins. The war of attrition in terms of having newer ships coming into service. Now, that's just in a vacuum. If France doesn't fall, or the French Navy decides to join the Royal Navy after the fall of France, I think with Royal Navy support, the French battle line is able to easily handle the Cavour and the Doria-class ships, along with having the two done. Kirk's to handle the Regim Marines cruisers. Question 6. Joe JJR 1368 asks British ships, what's your favorite British ship? Well, there are a lot. I think it's probably better if I go class by class for the era the channel covers. For battleships, Warspite is a very obvious pick. I love the Grand Old Lady. For battle cruisers, I love the looks of Tiger. She's very similar to the Congos, and amongst the most aesthetically pleasing ships out there for cruisers, it's hard to go against HMS Belfast, considering her history and the fact that she's still around. But for looks, I love the County-class cruisers. For Death Destroyers, it's a tough choice between HMS Cac and HMS Glowworm, purely for their stories and heroics. Although, overall, for a class, the Tribals are my favorite. In terms of submarines, it's the M-class, no doubt. What's not to love about submarines with 12-in guns and then their future conversions? Smoker Jim poses the question, as I found you from your collab with History of Everything. Do you think you will do more collabs with creators? And do you think you'll join the Orbit SLRI group of his? Of everything? Well, thanks for coming over from his channel. I had a lot of fun with that video. I would like to collab with other creators. It's just a matter of coordinating things. It's not an easy thing to do, especially across the Nordic ships. World Danish Ball Official 2176 asks, what's your opinion on Nordic navies during World War II? What's your favorite friendship of World War II? I will answer the second one first. It's Kirk. I love the design and the looks of that ship. It's just so French. My opinion on the Nordic navies during the Second World War, well, I think both Denmark and Norway were underprepared and didn't stand a chance with their outdated craft. The Swedes, on the other hand, I think could have given the Caesar in a real fight. Their coastal defense battleships were excellent ships. Well, modernized along with their other forces, the Finns, if we're counting them as a Nordic country, are very interesting. They have, without a doubt, my favorite class of coastal defense ships. Although I can't pronounce their names because they're Finnish. I'll put it up on screen now. The Finnish Navy was just too small to do anything of note, besides defending the coasts. But overall, I love the Nordic. Navies of the period, very interesting. An eclectic bunch of ships. Also, since you're Danish, do you think the Niels Yu would have done anything if she made it to the Royal Navy? Question 9. Grumpy Old Bugger writes, why is the flying velocity of an unladen swallow coming in for a landing on the old Royal Canadian carrier HMCS Bonaventure? It's a very interesting question, but it really depends. Is it an African or European swallow? I can't answer it until I books know. Question 10. Andrew writes, what are the top 5 books you'd recommend to viewers who like the books? Period. SL topic of your channel. Very good question and a tough one for me to narrow down, so I'll try my best. Number 1, I have Castles of Steel, Britain, Germany in the Winning of the Great War at Sea by Robert K. Massey. Being able to summarize the entire First World War into a thrilling narrative is so amazing. Might be one of my favorite books of all time. Number 2, More 4, the information in the book, The British Battleship 1906 to 1946 by Dr. Norman Fredman. I love Dr. Fredman's books for the information, but the good doctor's writing can be a little bit tiresome at times. Number 3, Russian and Soviet Battleships by Stephen Mlin. It's back in print thanks to Kel. It's an excellent read beyond the technical information, as Russian and Soviet ships aren't very well known for. It's really hard for me to narrow this one down, but Warships of the Seas Marine series by Gard Kupi and CLP Schoch, as they're the best. Source in English for the German ships of this period, in my opinion, number 5. The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors by James D. Horn Fisher is a great read about Taffy 3, and honestly, anything the late great James D. Horn Fisher wrote is great. There are so many great books out there, and off the top of my head, some of the other books I recommend are Any Naval History by Aidan Dodson, Ian Buxton's Big Gun Monitors Design. construction and operations 1914 to 1945, and of course, anything to do with Hermino Bonesco for the Regim Naval moments. Marina question 11. Madonna 7647, longtime supporter of the channel and channel member, asks, what is your most memorable naval moment involving the Royal Australian Navy? I really had to think about this one. It has to be my experience reading Ship of Ghosts, the story of USS Houston, FDR's legendary lost cruiser, the epic saga of her survivors, where in the Battle of Sunda Strait, USS Houston and HMAS Perth went down together in a disaster following the Battle of the Java Sea. As an American, the plight of both American sailors and Australians makes for a pretty emotional read. And the bravery the Australians showed is really something. Also, you really can't go wrong with Australian destroyers in World War II. Another read, Japan's specific war personal accounts of the Emperor's Warriors by Peter Williams, gives a lot of credit to the hardiness of the Australian sailors and soldiers they faced. I really need to do some more Aussie stuff. Look for some more. Question 12. We come to one of the Bismarck channel's longest-running supporters, and someone present at every live, Stephen Richards 339, who asks, was the Bismarck sunk by the Royal Navy or scuttled by our crew? True, probably the most controversial question on the list. So, thanks Stephen, but in all seriousness, I think it's a very difficult one to say, one way or the other, as none of us were there, and we have to deal with first and second-hand accounts of people who were there. I think it's possible either way, but if I were to make a guess, I'd say the Royal Navy sunk the Bismarck, although thinking on it either way, they sunk it by their own force of arms, or indirectly by forcing the German crew to scuttle that mighty beast. Either way, the ship went down, and I don't know why some people get so angry on the internet over it. Okay, with that, the first Q&A is concluded. I didn't get as many questions as I thought, probably because I didn't do a great job of advertising it. We'll see about one in the future, maybe another milestone. That one might be live. Who knows? Thank you to all who wrote questions. It's fun thinking about them. Anyway, thank you all for the continued support. I don't really have the words to describe my gratitude beyond thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I hope to continue to make videos for the foreseeable future, and hopefully you all will continue to watch. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.